Good morning and welcome to Druva's LinkedIn Live series, In Cloud We Trust. I'm Lisa Martin and talking to you today, we've got two Druva rock stars. The topic is CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Here to talk to you about why it is such a big deal right now and what you need to know today and going forward. We've got Druva's General Counsel, Jean McCann, with us. Good morning, Jean.
Good morning, Lisa.
We're excited to have you talk to us today.
Thank you, Lisa. There are two primary reasons why companies should be thinking about the CCPA right now. First is the California Attorney General noticed that it was full steam ahead in terms of enforcement starting July 1. So just last week, July 1 passed, and now we are in the phase where the California AG is going to start looking to enforce the CCPA against companies. Despite COVID, the California Attorney General's office is going forward. The second reason is CCPA has a private right of action. That means that individual consumers can bring actions against companies for violations of the CCPA. And we've already seen two of those cases come to light in California. One is Hannah Anderson. Hannah Anderson consumers' information, including their credit card information, their shipping addresses, their expiration dates, and CVV codes are available for sale on the dark web. And the allegations are that Hannah Anderson was not even aware that malware had infected their systems, and hackers were able to take that data and put it for sale on the dark web. And the company found out through law enforcement after the breach had occurred.
I'd like to get Stephen Manley's input on that. Guys, Stephen Manley, the one, the only chief technologist at Druva. He's back with us by popular demand. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Lisa.
So the Hannah Anderson suit, and if you're not familiar with Hannah Anderson, I had to look it up too. It's a children's apparel retailer. This was a breach with Salesforce. And Stephen, we were talking with Curtis Preston last month about Salesforce and what's ending in terms of data recovery support the end of this month, July 31st. In a case like Hannah Anderson with Salesforce data, how would Druva have helped eliminate that as a risk?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always talk about in cloud is the shared responsibility model. So the cloud provider, be it a SaaS provider like Salesforce or any sort of cloud service that you're using, generally comes to you and says, our responsibility is to make sure that our environment is not hacked. But the responsibility of what's in that environment, your data, you're still responsible for that. It's just like when you were running on premises, your data, your responsibility, whether it's for privacy regulations like CCPA or just general data protection needs and requirements. And so if you look at someone like a Druva, obviously a lot of what we do is we do protect data that is in those cloud environments like Salesforce so that you can make sure that you've got a copy. And it's really part of your overall sort of approach to how am I making sure that I'm managing this data, checking to make sure that things aren't exposed so that you could be sued later by CCPA infringements, making sure that some sort of mistake doesn't mean that you can't recover or bring back your customers' data. So again, Druva is really just part of that solution that says you need to treat that data as a first-class citizen, and it's your responsibility to make sure you do so.
So Jean, back to you. CCPA, as you mentioned, enforcement began last week, July 1st, 2020. AG, the Attorney General of California, not delaying this due to COVID. Yeah. Give our audience an understanding of the criteria, because from what you've shared with us, you don't even have to be a company based in California or the US.
That's correct, Lisa. There are three primary categories of companies that will be subject to the CCPA. The first category is the company has to have at least $25 million in annual revenue. And there is no guidance as to whether that annual revenue needs to come from California consumers. So on the conservative side, people are looking at $25 million in global annual revenue. The second category is companies that are buying or selling personal data of at least 50,000 households, consumers, or devices. And the third category is companies that collect more than half their annual revenue from the sale of personal data. So these categories encompass a very large group of companies in and outside of the state of California. And you're right, Lisa, they don't even have to have a physical presence based in the United States.
So this 3 criteria went into effect, now being enforced. But if we think back to January, remember the good times before the pandemic, pre-pandemic notices didn't cover things like contact tracing or on-site temperature checks. Jean, what do businesses need to do today to look at their privacy policies as this new data, personal data, is coming into their business daily?
It's a good point, Lisa. Privacy policies and notices are really just step one. And you're right, in January, none of COVID-19 was, no one anticipated we would be where we are today, sitting here in July. But as companies think about returning to the office, a lot of local regulations in the state of California are requiring health screenings. And some companies, when they're returning to office, are conducting those health screenings either through self-certification questionnaires or through body temperature checks. And either approach implicates the CCPA because that is considered the collection of personal health data. What that means, in addition to notifying the employees that you will be collecting this data, is gathering your internal resources, your IT department, your security department, your legal department, and your privacy teams, making sure that everyone knows where that data is stored, who has access to it, how long the company should maintain that data, and also being able to monitor and track it so you can extract it, duplicate it, and delete it upon request of the individual. So these are all things that companies should be thinking about now.
Should be thinking about. So Stephen, if we think about all of the different sources where data is, that those sources are growing day by day. It could be that you have to send a health check by email, or maybe it's by Slack or something like that. So knowing that this personal information is now a requirement for companies that are trying to get back to some workforce being on location, how can Druva help if we've got email or personal information scattered across apps, cloud, endpoints?
It's one of the first steps we talk with people, and we've been talking about this actually even before the pandemic started. This concept of small data sprawl, where for years we talked about big data and these huge lakes and Hadoop and all these wonderful things of aggregating the data. And what we've really found is, in fact, your data ends up in all sorts of places. Laptops, especially as people are working from home, Slack, Salesforce, Microsoft 365, G Suite. All of these places where your data ends up, the first and most important thing is you've got to get your arms wrapped around that. You've got to be able to bring that data together in one place so that you can make sure that it's safe, so that you can check it for, is there personal information in a spot that I didn't think was going to be, and can I make sure I make that fit my policy? And so that's one of the big areas where Druva really helps people, is no matter where your data lives, all of those different places that we talked about, Druva can help protect it, bring it together into one location so that you can start to get the data in one place, make sure you can see it all in one place so that you can start to use techniques like how long do I retain it, searching for personal information, heck, even things like legal holds if you need over time, to be able to make sure that you've got a coherent data policy for all this new personal information that's coming up.
So imagine, Stephen, this is now not just a conversation that is related to IT. Jean, you mentioned before in terms of what companies need to do, get some internal resources together, but I imagine that's IT, legal, security.
That's correct. It's all of those departments that help track and monitor and store the data. And I think part of CCPA is that they've got a security team has put together some reasonable security protections around the collection of data, and that's part of the obligation of the company to make sure that those security measures are in place. So security definitely has a large role in CCPA.
And I think, John, one of the interesting things, being more obviously me from the IT side, you from the legal side, one of the challenges we've had in our industry forever is this: how long do I retain data? Because as a backup person, the default I always heard from my legal teams was either one of, well, just hold it forever. That's your job, no big deal. Or I had other very aggressive legal teams, delete everything after 30 days. It's all liability. How do you recommend that IT sort of work with legal on this to sort of figure out what are reasonable retention periods that are both important for hitting CCPA and meeting those guidelines, but aren't basically technically impossible that make us feel like, you're asking us for miracles.
No, that's something that legal and IT work very closely on. There are very few categories of retention periods that are statutorily defined. For example, payroll data, HR data, tax returns. There are some statutory guidelines in terms of how long companies are required to hold that data. But other than that, most of the marketing data, engineering data, planning data, all of those are very company specific. So for example, companies could work cross-functionally and determine with each department what's the appropriate hold period. And as long as that is consistent and IT is able to enforce those policies, they're very individual and up to the company.
All right, if you're just joining us, Druva is talking about CCPA. We've covered why it is so important right now, enforcement as of last week, some suits that are already in play here. Stephen's talked to us a little bit about Druva as a technology asset. But Stephen, a question coming in from our LinkedIn Live audience is, how does Druva differentiate with respect to CCPA from Veeam?
I think a couple of things. The first one is obviously in terms of some of the PII detection that we bring to the table, especially as a SaaS provider. So it isn't something that you're having to set up a separate environment. You're having to build all this technology yourself. Not only do we bring the data in one place, but because we are SaaS, we actually offer these services on top of that. And so that's one really big difference. It's, again, the difference between, I think, being a SaaS provider and a software provider. I think the second one probably is, again, the breadth of coverage, being able to bring all that data into the cloud, again, and in sort of an automated fashion, as opposed to kind of expecting you to push it up to the cloud and manage all those costs and deal with sort of capacity planning and billing, and saying, look, it's all just part of your standard all-in bill, one cost, it's in the cloud, you get all this functionality, and you don't have to worry about it.
That question comes from John Fuller, and John also wants to dig a little bit deeper, Stephen, on Druva's data resiliency capabilities.
Yeah, without getting too deep on that, because obviously I want to keep on CCPA, but basically, you see most vendors, when they talk about storing data in the cloud, they say, well, yeah, we're built on top of Amazon's S3 storage, and you can look and you can say that's an incredibly reliable storage. Of course, all of us are really layering technology on top of that. So, if you look at Druva, there's a number of basically resiliency checks for how we do deduplication, how we store the data, our envelope encryption to keep it secure. And so, if you look at us top to bottom, I would say the first step is we make sure the data is always encrypted, and encrypted in a way that only the customers can get access to it. We can't get access to it. AWS can't get access to it. It's all just your data, and we're just holding it for you. I think the second one is, again, top to bottom, sort of checksums and resiliency checks to make sure that not only is the underlying storage resilient, but the way we store it and the way we retrieve it is resilient. And then the third is the fact that we are built on incredibly reliable AWS infrastructure to make sure that the data is highly resilient and replicated in multiple locations.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. All right, let's get back to CCPA in our last 5 minutes or so of the conversation. Zhang, this is a fluid environment, because more changes are proposed to CCPA starting with the November 2020 general election. Talk to us about what we can expect.
Thanks, Lisa. The November 2020 general election ballot is going to include what some people call a CCPA 2.0. It's known as a CPRA, and it's essentially run by the same proponents, but they've decided to add two major differences. One is they've added additional categories of personal information, and now this category is called sensitive personal information. It includes categories such as religion, social security numbers, driver's licenses, financial and health information, and consumers can essentially ask companies to only use that category of sensitive personal information for the very limited purpose of the goods or services that they're providing to that consumer. So that means that companies have to be able to track additional categories of personal data and make sure that it's accessible, it could be duplicated and deleted if the customer requests. And even more interesting on the CPRA is that it may need to be corrected. So the consumer has the ability to request that that information be corrected if it's found to be inaccurate or erroneous. So that is up and coming in November 2020. If it does pass by a simple majority vote, it will come into effect in January 1, 2021, but most of the compliance provisions will go into effect in 2023.
And CPRA, or as you called it, CCPA 2.0, California Privacy Rights Act. So that's on the November 2020 general election ballot, but some changes are also coming January 1st, 2021. John, talk to us about the expansion of CCPA with respect to that date.
So when CCPA went into effect in January 1, 2020, there was a limited one-year reprieve for companies with respect to employees. And this includes current and former employees, job applicants, and directors. But that one-year reprieve expires January 1, 2021. So at that point in time, we can expect that all the additional category of employers will have the same rights as consumers. So they will be able to ask companies about what personal data is stored. They'll be able to request that that data be deleted. So it just broadens the scope of who has rights under the CCPA starting in January.
And Lisa, that's an interesting thing, because as I've talked to a number of customers and bring a little bit of the GDPR experience into this, one of the things that they've found is everybody thinks it's the regulators that are going to come and get me. That's why I'm going to get fined. But a lot of these actions actually start with a consumer or an employee that files a claim that is not processed effectively, is not processed to their sort of, I guess, satisfaction. And that actually ends up triggering a complaint, which triggers the investigation. And so I've met a lot of companies that are looking and saying they're very focused on this January 1st, 2021 date because they don't want their employees, obviously, to be dissatisfied and potentially complain and then trigger these complaints. So it's a really big thing. People always think about the regulators, but the regulators often get involved only in response to, I think, a complaint.
So the citizens are becoming regulators. So Stephen, if we look at the growing data volumes, we talked about that with even just respect to C19 and health checks and things like that. But now when companies are going to have to be looking internally as well as externally with respect to consumers, Zhang is saying they need to know where the data is stored, who has access to it, how it can be accessed, extracted, deleted, duplicated. How can the Druva Cloud platform help a business get their arms around that?
Yeah, again, the biggest thing in any of this is just being able to get that data in one place. It is so hard right now. If you try to do a piecemeal approach for each different type of data, you don't have the people, you don't have the time, you don't have the energy to be able to do a whole bunch of one-off solutions. You really need something that's going to tie everything together for you. And then I think the second part is it's going to be hard to predict exactly how much data is going to come because of health screenings and frankly, coming out of COVID and as the economy hopefully continues to accelerate, what kind of growth you're going to see. And so I think the second part is the ability to sort of pay as you go, dynamically scale and not have to predict ahead of time and overinvest in capital or people and then find that you were off the mark. And so I think Druva's ability to, again, have that pay as you go model, have that scale on demand model is really useful for people that are setting themselves up for success, but they want the flexibility to really be able to grow or shrink as they need.
Excellent, Stephen, talking to us about Druva as the technology asset. Let's wrap here, guys. Zhang, you shared a lot of knowledge and wisdom with our audience this morning. What other resources or locations would you suggest for individuals and employers to go to learn more about CCPA and what's coming?
I think it's important to coordinate with legal, privacy, IT, and security. All those teams will have knowledge that they can share about developments, particularly on the regulatory side. As we can see, even from the November ballot coming forth in 2020, these regulations evolve all the time, and developments happen every few weeks, every few days. And so it's important, especially on the federal, state, and local side, these privacy regulations will differ. So it's important to stay coordinated and to contact counsel and internal teams as needed.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us this morning. We appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks for having us, Lisa.
And of course, Stephen, thank you so much for all of your wisdom as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa. It's the first time anyone said I've had wisdom.
He's laughing because he knows it's true. All right, guys, we want to thank you for joining Druva. This is our 5th LinkedIn Live episode. We thank all of you for watching all of them. We know you have. Join us in 2 weeks from today. We're going to be talking about Salesforce, because remember what we said a few minutes ago, July 31st, 2020, Salesforce Data Recovery Options Stop. W. Curtis Preston is going to join me along with Druva Customer Expel, their deputy CISO, talking about Salesforce data protection. You won't want to miss it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.